Hey guys, welcome to the Kane Audio vlog. It's Friday, so it's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll answer the questions in next week's video. Before I go on to last week's video, see, is there any house admin I need to cover? I don't think so. No. So there we go. That's that. I can't even, as usual, my brain doesn't work on a Friday. This is probably the worst day for me to be doing AMAs and stuff on a Friday, because usually by the end of the week my brain's a bit sort of frazzled anyway. So tough shit though. Right, so I'm going to go straight into last week's questions. Starting at the top, Sunset86. Hey Dom, Deadmau5, high five. He spelt it wrong and gone, only joking, Deadmau5, but you guys won't see that. Another good AMA as always. I don't really have any technical questions, but was wondering, do you do mastering as well as mixing for clients? And do you only mix one genre, e.g. electronic? Yes-ish. So I have done a fair amount of mastering. I do pretty much, well, most of my tracks are all self-mastered. It's very rare that I'll use an external mastering engineer, and that's usually if I sort of either admit defeat on a track, or sometimes you might get a bit of a rogue element in a track, and you know, you got to know your own limits, I suppose. So, but it's not very often that I do that. So yeah, I have a few regular clients for mix down work, sound design work, things like that. So those people I've sort of, you know, if they've come to me and wanted some mastering, then I'll do that. Also, any mix down I do for anyone includes a master as well. Because I like to give a mix down and master, so once I've done a mix down, I kind of test it, what it's going to sound like when it's mastered, by giving it a master, and then obviously so that comes with the mix down. So so yeah, so I guess I do. It's not something I directly offer necessarily, but if someone comes to me and they like what I've done, then that's great. I did have a client a few weeks ago actually who came to me for a mix down, which I did, and did the master and everything, and he sort of questioned a few of the processes and whatnot, and I'd sort of explained, look, I'll just have the master, it's up to you. If you want to find someone else who specializes in mastering, go ahead with that. He ended up going to the distributor, and I don't even know who the mastering engineer was, but he did go to the distributor and said, you know, get it mastered. And then a week later he came back to me saying, thank you very much, I've actually gone with your masters because I got the masters back from the mastering engineer and hated them. They'd just squashed out all the dynamics. So yeah, so it is something I do. But it's not something I directly offer, because I kind of feel like that's not my main job. I'm not in a custom built mastering studio, and I don't have mastering monitors, and I do feel that a professional mastering engineer will have a slightly different setup and a different list of equipment, and I think, you know, I don't want to be stepping on toes there. So that's yeah. Also, a track I've been working on for a long time, doesn't really fit any genre I'm aware of. Good. It's all electronic, but I can't... Oh, I didn't answer the electronic bit. No, it's not just electronic stuff I do. I actually really enjoy doing mix downs and masters for a lot of acoustic stuff and stuff as well. So yeah, it's all electronic, but I can't categorize it. I just wrote it how I wanted it to sound, with the chords, drums, etc., and it has emotion for me. I couldn't care less if a piece of music was dubstep, house or trance, etc., as long as the track brings out some kind of emotional response in me, whether it be the chords, melodies or whatever. What's your take on this? Yeah, you've just said it. That is my take, to be honest. I'm not interested in genres per se. I get that other people are, and I get that record labels, promoters, agents, they kind of need a genre from you because it's easier for them to market and to sell. And I can understand that that's important to them. You know, if a promoter is selling a club night as a trance night and then booked a dubstep DJ, then, you know, maybe the audience aren't interested in that. So I get that some people are fussy and some people need it to be specific. It's just not, it's not what I'm into. And I've probably said several times before, I write my music for me. You know, it's not about what genre it is. I couldn't care less. So yeah, and I think a lot of my tracks will kind of fit in between, I don't know, progressive house and techno and maybe tech house. I don't know, that seems to be changing every week. And yeah, and the fact that I can't answer that tells you everything you need to know. I really don't care, so long as it's got a good melody or a good something that grabs me. Are you genre specific? No. Or do you care as long as the music makes you feel something? Exactly. Thanks, Dom. Sorry for the long, complicated question. Hope you know what I mean. Have a great weekend. I did, and you too. Cavacay. Cheers, Dom. Yet another very useful AMA. Deadmau5, high five. On the subject of record labels, if you were to start a record label now, what would you do differently from last time? Or what advice would you give someone who started their own label? Oh, that's a good question. So starting with what would I do differently? I think it depends on what you want your record label to be. And I also think that a lot of people out there start record labels for maybe the wrong reasons. So I'll start with what you maybe shouldn't do, and this probably won't please many of the people watching this channel, but I kind of feel like I don't think you right, so people who are producers and running a record label, I think there's a clash of interests there. I'm not saying you shouldn't do both, but I'm saying that if you do both, you need to be very careful and really genuinely consider which one is more important to you and what direction do you want either one to go. A lot of people set up a record label as just their own outlet, and that's fine. If you're just self-releasing and you're the only artist on the roster, do whatever you want, that's great. But if you're signing tracks from other artists and pushing it out there, you need to be careful that you're not just doing that to give yourself some exposure, because whether it's conscious or subconscious, you're going to be treading on the exposure of other artists, and you're going to be putting yourself ahead of other artists. And if they don't know that or expect that, then things can go sour pretty quickly. So I think that's something that people really need to think about these days. But aside from that, the other question then that I mentioned is how do you approach the record label view? So it depends on what you want your output to be. Do you want it to be a full-time job, successful business, competing with the likes of, say, Mau5trap or XL or whoever? Or do you want it to just be an artistic outlet that doesn't necessarily turn a profit ever? And those are two completely different paths. If you want it to just be an artistic outlet, then that's probably the easier route, because you just find friends who make cool music and you release their music and you all maybe collaborate on things and basically form like a team of people, or a family of producers, and that can be a great thing, and it can offer a lot of benefits. And I think if you approach it with the right mentality and you each discuss what you want and how that fits in with a label, and you sort of treat it as a cooperative business, then that can be quite good, because you can then start maybe branching out to, say, label nights in a local club or something. And but again, that's only if all the artists are somewhat local. So it kind of depends on your artistic focus and what you expect to get from the label, I suppose. However, if you want it to become a full-time job and a professional, profitable business, then you need to really look at having capital investment, and you know, you need to be one hell of a salesperson, and you need to get some unique contracts and deals with distributors, and there's a lot to think about with that. And I think, you know, there was an old saying, what was it, how to have $1 million in the music industry. The answer is start with 2 million. And that was an old thing from the 90s, if I remember rightly. Lots of like record label execs used to say that, because just, you know, so if you look at major labels in the 90s, something like 10% of the music they signed actually got released. So there was a high chance, if you got signed to a major record label in the 90s, there was a very high chance that your music would have never come out. They'd have signed your, say, an album deal, they'd have signed your album, they'd have given you the advance, they'd have paid for your studio time, whatever it is it takes to get that album complete, and then it would have sat on a shelf for 10 years and done nothing. And the reason for that is because the sort of the rule of thumb with big record labels in the 90s was just basically sign loads of great talent, and when the time's right, you'll push it out, you'll market it, you'll spend a fortune, you'll make a fortune, even though it was probably only 10% of those that actually got released, and then 10% of those probably paid for the other 90%. So you know, it was a big hit and miss market basically. So obviously it's different now, it's different in every conceivable way. So but I do think, you know, if you want to treat it as a full-time business and you want to be a record label, you need to consider, do you really want to be a producer? Because I think that those two things clash, and you know, they're not mutually exclusive, but they're not mutually inclusive either. And I think if you're going to set up a record label, I know a lot of friends of mine who've set up record labels and then kind of regret it afterwards, because the record label takes so much time and energy and focus that actually they don't even get enough time to produce, or vice versa, they're producing so much that they're not getting enough time to really focus on the label and get it to a position that they want. So yeah, so is that some advice? I guess somewhere in there, read between the lines. Zombo, self-release versus released by a big or small label. Here we go, we're on a label trend this week. I think if a person likes a track, he or she is not going to Google Mau5trap 13 uppercut. It's going to be a 13 uppercut. God, I am bad at explaining these things. Hang on, what? I think if a person likes a track, he or she is not going to Google Mau5trap 13 uppercut. It's going to be 13 uppercut. God, I'm bad at... Right, so I think you're saying is, if people like a track, they're going to Google for the artist, not for the record label. Yes, you're right, from the consumer end. What I'm trying to say is, if your music is good, it does not matter if it gets released by a label or not, it's just good music. Artists like Kill the Noise, Moonboy, and new artists that I really like, Five House, have all good music. Heavy breathing, Deadmau5, high five. Yes and no. So, okay, I'll reverse that into a question for you guys. How many of you watching this video right now heard of me before I was signed to Mau5trap? I would imagine, at a guess, probably 30, 40, 50% at the most. And I think that speaks volume, considering I've been earning a full-time living from music for, what, 15 years, and I've been signed to Mau5trap for, I don't know, 3 years, something like that, 3 or 4. And yet I still don't have a massive following, and I'm not world famous, I'm not going on tours, I'm not doing this, that and the other. So I'm kind of in the middle ground, where I think self-release versus big or small label is a big question, because I could self-release, and I have self-released lots of times. Hell, I ran my own label for years at the start. I would say, okay, to give you guys an idea, bearing in mind I've been doing this for 15 years, I'm not famous, I'm not whatever, but I don't think I'm a nobody. I don't think I'm completely unheard of. Even if it's more as maybe a sound designer than a producer, my name is in most studios in the world. So there's a lot of producers and DJs and whatever who've heard my name. If I was to write a track today and self-release it, and by that I mean just hand it to my distributor and go, give it a release and put it out with no marketing, anything like that, I think I would probably sell 10 copies, and maybe 100 at the most, which will give me a grand total of a penny. It's just not worth bothering. So let's look at maybe a step up from just self-releasing and not giving a shit. Say I self-release and I budget, say, $100 on Facebook advertising and a couple of, I don't know, something here and there, some online marketing. I probably still wouldn't sell more than 100 units, because Facebook marketing, even though I boost the odd post every now and then because Facebook forces me to, because they restrict the views on your own fans, I probably spend a few pounds a month. It's not anything significant, and that tends to get maybe 2 likes and then nothing. Give you another idea, I did some merch. I get people, or had people, there was a series of people at one point who were asking me for some Kane Audio merch, and to date, I did that, what, 4 or 5 months ago. I pushed a link on the bottom of every video for about a month. I pushed it on Facebook and Twitter and did some marketing for it as well. And I can tell you right now, I spent more on marketing than I made back from merch in sales. So that was a loss. So when people say, hey, why don't you have any merch? Well, that's why, because I lose money on it. It's, you know, it was a pointless endeavour. Having spent a week solid designing it all, getting it all tested, finding the right place, the company to provide it. So not including money I lost in terms of work lost, because I could have been doing work while I was doing that. Yeah, so I don't even want to think about how much work or how much money I potentially lost, because that's not worth thinking about. Best to pretend that didn't happen. So similarly with self-release, you know, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that your goal as an artist, whether you want fame and fortune or not, your goal as an artist generally is to get a decent amount of exposure. And the best way, not the only way, but the most efficient way of doing that is collaborating with a product, brand or artist that has an existing following that you're likely to tap into. So for example, if I signed to a record label that maybe every now and then did a house track, that's not really tapping into much new fan base. Even if that record label had followings of millions, if they only do the odd house track, I'm not really getting my key demographic, because I think my key demographic are people who are kind of head nodding music. It's, you know, people who really like the inner workings of house and techno and melodies and production. So I know I don't appeal to the mass market. My music doesn't appeal to the mass market, so I don't see there's much point in tapping into that, because that's not going to lead to more sales. However, signing to someone like Mau5trap, well, my music, I think, fits well into the Mau5trap vibe, and so that's a good market. I don't think it's perfect, but I think it's a good market for me to tap into, because Mau5trap has a big following that tend to be more open-minded. They're not specifically looking for dubstep or specifically looking for house or techno or trance or whatever. So the Mau5trap following is a good open-minded following, and I think most of you watching this video are probably fans of Mau5trap, and I think that works for me. So it works for me to release with a bigger label like that, because their existing following are going to be open to me. However, if I was to write an album today and sign it to Universal or Sony or, you know, Atlantic, or, you know, someone, a huge record label, I'd be a drop in the ocean, and I don't see that that would benefit me, because that's not my demographic. So I think the point I'm trying to make with self-release versus big or small label, it's a tricky one, but I think self-releasing, unless you're... So another factor to talk about, I guess, is the fact that I'm pretty much socially inept. I don't like going to nightclubs and being the center of attention and you know, kiss-arsing promoters, and you know, I'm not I don't know what the word is. I'm trying to think of what the word is. No, don't know. But I'm not one of those people who has, you know, a million friends and constantly is a big extrovert or whatever. And I think, you know, if you're that way inclined and you're great at marketing and you could sell snow to an Eskimo, then maybe self-release works for you, because that's something you can really push, and if you enjoy that push. For me, I hate selling myself. I can't bear selling myself, so I'd much rather recognize that as a weakness and let someone else use their strengths for it. So to me, signing to a record label is pretty much vital. I don't think I would ever self-release. I might just as a bit of a passion project, but I would never expect anything to come off the back of it, because I'm good at selling things that I love, and I do love my music, but I'm not good at selling myself. So I accept that as my weakness. I accept that at my age that's never going to change. So for me, I need a record label that is going to be able to do that for me. So I think those are things to consider for any artist. It's not just a case of who's going to get you sales or who's going to get you exposure. And also, one thing I will tell you all right now, because I've used the word exposure a couple of times in this video, don't let anyone ever sell you something for exposure. Is a hoax. The moment someone says, can you do it for exposure, or it'll be great exposure, it's not great exposure. You know, these things happen in drips and drabs, and you will never have one gig or one release or anything like that that just magically makes everything amazing overnight. You need to keep at it. So yeah, hopefully I've ranted enough on that. Jadranko Vitiach. Hi Dom, I have a question about this little sparkling things in songs that are usually called ear candy. What kind of approach do you have to build this musical of effects things, and can you share some knowledge about how to make them to be interesting? I'm not sure I know what you mean when it comes to sparkling things in songs called ear candy. For me, that's a melody and sound design, and I think those are the things to focus on. Every sound in a track needs to complement every other sound. If it doesn't complement all the other sounds in a track, then get rid of it, because it's not doing its job. When it comes to catchiness that makes somebody want more and to come back, I think you need to focus on having a good structured melody, and that only comes through practice, and also making sure that it's a well designed or unique design sound. I hear a lot of music at the moment where people send me a track and it could be a really good melody, but it's just a saw wave, pluck, lead, single oscillator in 1 octave range, and kind of loses impact. Whereas if you go for maybe just a weird quirky synth that has a rich deep sound, maybe lots of saturation on there, or even saturated reverb, or something that just gives it a thickness and a body, that can just, that, you know, you could already have a great melody, but throw in that rich thick sound and you've now got yourself a big impact track. And I think that's kind of vital. To me, that's what I call ear candy. I don't know if other people do. Feel free to chip in below this video and let me know. Reality on X production. Before I go on to your comment, I'm just going to hit reset on the camera because it's at 27 minutes-ish and it cuts out at 30 for some reason. So see you in a sec. And I'm back. By the way, just as an off-note thing, it seems like my image has got sharper, so let me know if it does your end as well, because I've been fiddling with all the lighting and the camera settings and stuff. I kind of figured, I've never really given a shit before, and I kind of figured maybe I should, so I've been fiddling with it this week and last week. Right, Reality on X production. How you master your track for YouTube or MP3s, loudness, dithering, etc. Do you keep your last limiter threshold at 0 or minus 0.3? So with a master, I always set the last limiter to be minus 0.5 dB, sometimes minus 1 dB, and I always make sure I use a true peak limiter, and I highly recommend New Gen Audio ISL2 VST. It's a great limiter, and you've got there's a little button called diff, so you can hear the bits that are getting cut out, so you can hear what's contained within the gain reduction. So what generally happens is you'll see the little red meter flickering at say minus 1 dB, and you hit the diff button and you're just hearing the little transients of usually, well, maybe a hi-hat, definitely a clap, and sometimes the transient of a kick, and you're hearing just those pushing through the limiter, so you can hear what's being taken away from your track. And I love that because you can start hearing the difference, and it allows you to sort of dial it back a bit if you think you're taking too much out of a track. So yeah, ISL2, highly recommend it. So yeah, so I set my limiter threshold at least minus half a dB, maybe minus 1 dB. The reason for that, and in fact the reason it's good practice to always set it at minus 1 dB, especially if you're not using a true peak limiter, and so when it comes to dithering, it's less needed. But I'm not going to go into dithering too much now because it's a massively complicated science. But when you dither something down, or bounce a track down, and say it was 24-bit, 48K or whatever, and you bounce it down to 16-bit 44.1, you can have what's called inter-sample clicking. So if you think of the frequency, so it's going from 48k sample rate to 44.1k sample rate. In between those samples there are going to be slight peaks where it becomes, where a transient might be almost at peak through at one sample point, and then in a different location the next sample point, and so it forms a square wave type issue. I'm probably not explaining this very well, but I haven't really thought about it outside of right now. But what that does is that causes clipping, basically. So you'll notice sometimes if you bounce something down as an MP3, so for example my audio interface here, it goes green lights, then yellow, and then red is clipping. Sometimes you can hear a master WAV and it'll hit the yellow, and that's fine, it hits 0 dB. Convert it to MP3 and play it, and it's suddenly in the red, it's clipping. And the reason for that is because your transients have been cut off mid sample rate and they're now clipping. So things like YouTube, SoundCloud is particularly bad at it. You'll notice sometimes people's tracks will sound quite badly distorted on SoundCloud. YouTube apparently does it. I've not looked at YouTube for that, so I don't, but apparently it does it. And the reason is because you're changing the sample rate of a track from one format to another. Could be a variable sample rate like MP3. So yes, there are issues with that, so that's why I always recommend a true peak limiter, and it's true peak limiting is what you want, because that will peak something at a much higher sample rate, so that when you come to conversion and divisions of, then when you come to conversion it's not going to have that inter-sample clipping. So yes, there we go. However, when it comes to mastering for YouTube MP3s, the final thing then you've mentioned is loudness. I measure loudness in LUdB or LKFS, basically the same thing. So if you measure in LUdB, I aim for most tracks. If I'm honest, I guess most of my tracks will probably hit minus 12 LUdB, which is fairly squashed for music in general. That's not much dynamic range, but I've always kind of fought both sides of the war there, because while things like YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, whatever, they all try and fight the loudness war, I think we've talked about that before, where they sort of try and combat that by automatically adjusting the gains of a track to match the LUdB reference, which I think is minus 16 is what they aim for. While I think all of that is great, until DJ mixers start doing the same, then electronic music is always going to have that loudness war. Because when you put together a promo mix or a mix in Ableton, or you're DJing in a club, you're going to find yourself constantly grabbing at the gains, because there are a lot of DJs out there who just want to redline everything, and they don't understand dynamic range, or don't want to understand dynamic range, and they will not play a track in a club if it doesn't just destroy everything in its path. So I kind of aim for a happy medium. There are tracks out there that hit sort of minus 6, 7, 8 LUdB, which is really squashed, but it seems like the industry standard sort of goal is about minus 16, so I kind of aim for in between there, basically. Hopefully that helps. Cake C, thanks for the response, Dom. You're welcome. Zombo, I don't know how long it takes to make a studio, but come on, Dom, it's been a year. I'm begging you. By the way, make a time-lapse video of making the studio. I think it would be really cool. That's kind of the plan, but it's a tricky one. I think it probably takes, so Sunset 86 has replied, I think it probably takes a while and a lot of hard-earned cash to build a studio, lol. Yes. So the plan is still there, kind of. I'm still struggling to actually sort of make final decisions, because no matter what kind of building I go for, whether I self-build from scratch or get an off-the-shelf job or have it installed for me or whatever, the costs keep going up in all of those scenarios. And not only that, I kind of figured, well, it needs to last 10-15 years, so I don't want to make a silly decision and get something that then every time I step outside the house I look at and go, ugh, terrible. Not only that, the finances are horrific, and what I haven't said, I don't think, I probably might have touched on it, I don't know why I would have though, is that this whole house, you can see in fact shitty wallpaper in here because I'm in the back room of the house, and this room hasn't probably been touched for I don't know how many years before I moved in. So there's a lot to renovate in the house as well, and I'm kind of slowly going through that as best as I can, while also panicking and wondering when the fuck am I going to get my studio. So yeah, thanks for reminding me. Yeah, it's it hasn't quite been a year yet. No, it's been about 8 or 9 months, I think. But whatever the case, it's been 8 or 9 months of just frustration. So thanks for adding to that, Zombo. But yeah, no, I will be doing a time-lapse video. I'm hoping to start it. I've got to get foundations and stuff done as well, because the garden is sloping, which may or may not mean even more work, because who knows what you're going to find when you start digging a garden, and we may find that there are going to be water issues in the way that the water runs, so it might be more complicated than I first hoped, but who knows, we'll find out one day. If anyone wants to give me a sack full of cash, then that would be greatly appreciated. Yeah, other than that though, I am going to be doing the sort of building the studio as a separate series to these weekly AMAs, because I figured even if it's an off-the-shelf, or maybe especially if it's an off-the-shelf deal that I go for, I'm pretty sure most of you guys are going to be quite interested in how much it's going to cost, what sort of work there is involved. I'm hoping to go for an off-the-shelf package that is mostly what they call SIPS panels, but unfortunately they all come with felt roofs, and felt roofs, especially in a place like Manchester or the UK in general, where we get wind and rain for 11.5 months of the year, felt roofs are no good, and I don't trust that. So SIPS panels are basically like pre-insulated walls, so the main structure will probably be built out of those, and then I forget what they call it. Is it EDPRM or EGPRM, something like that? But it's basically like a rubber roof that you can do. So yeah, so there's loads of combinations to look at, and these are the things that I'm hoping to be able to discuss in pretty great detail. But we'll see how it goes. There's going to be a lot of choices along the way, which I'm not going to enjoy, because I just want a decent studio, but then don't we all? So there we go. That, my friends, is the end of it for this week. Should be on time this week, hopefully. So yeah, thank you very much for watching this far into the video. I feel like it's been a long rant this week. And to prove that you've made it this far into the video, I'm going to look at the recommended videos and see if there is a word. Let's go with... Oh, we've done that one. Running out of words, I need a dictionary. I also, because I know that there's quite a few guys on this channel that not native English speakers, I always try and go for a word that is not over the top. Someone's recommending how to sell anything on Facebook and Instagram. Fair enough. There we go. So the keyword is Instagram for no reason. So if you've made it this far into the video, comment the word Instagram to let me know, and you'll get a high five in next week's. I don't think there's anything else I need to mention. No. So it's Friday. Oh, it's Mother's Day on Sunday. This is your last reminder. Go to the shop now. Get your mum a nice bunch of flowers or a box of chocolates or whatever it is that your mum wants, because your mum deserves it. And have a good weekend, and I'll see you guys next week. Cheers.